Hi, thanks everyone for joining in. I'm excited to have Zoe Coyle join me today. Hi, Zoe.
Hello.
Just want to tell everyone a little bit about Zoe. Zoe's spent over 15 years as a corporate and communication training, building on her 20 years experience as a film and theatre actor in the UK, US, and Australia. She is the communication coach of choice for the CEOs of some of Australia's largest companies, small businesses, and not for profit organisations. And her first novel is Where the Light Gets In. Hopefully everyone can see my copy there. It's disappearing a little bit in the background. And just want to tell people as well that thanks to Ultimo Press, if you ask a question during the Facebook Live, you'll have a chance to win a copy of Where the Light Gets In. So welcome, Zoe.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a bit about Where the Light Gets In.
Yeah, for sure. So it's about a young woman named Delphi Hoffman who is living in London and just kind of getting her life together. And she receives a phone call from her mother, who is living in Tasmania. And her mother has a terminal disease, and she calls Delphi across the world to be in support of her as she dies. So it has a euthanasia theme, which sounds really earnest and heavy, but the book is not that. It's about friendship and family and homecoming and belonging. And then lots of good things like dachshunds, which I'm obsessed with, and beauty and arts and siblinghood.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us what was the first idea you had for your novel?
I can. And look, it sounds kind of contrived, but there literally was a moment. So I've tried and failed to write 7 novels, but this was the first idea that came, and I was sitting in a bathtub, very heavily pregnant with my first child, and I was thinking that I needed to get myself sorted out. She was due in a couple of months, and I was thinking, or maybe 6 weeks. And I was just thinking, that's an interesting idea that in 6 weeks' time, my mistakes and who I am, the weight of that, the importance of that is going to change because somebody else is going to be involved in this. So potentially my psychic mess. And then that's the great thing as a writer, you get to ask a what if question, and then everything ripples out from that. So the original question was, what would it be to have a woman who is trying to resolve herself for the birth of a child? So that was where the genesis arrived for the book.
Yeah. And you said you had tried and failed with 7 books previously.
Yeah.
That's quite a big effort.
You say quite a big effort. It's quite a lot of failure. Yeah, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe the story behind how you got this one published?
Yeah. So, I look. I don't know. I wish I had a pat answer for you. I read Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. Have you read that? Did you
No,
read that book?
I haven't. No.
No, it's a really interesting book, and but part of it is that a part of what I love is that writing is just graft. So you just turn up at the computer or wherever you're doing it, and you write it. But another part of it is this kind of mystical quality. And I wasn't raised in a religious household or a mystical household, but this idea that you're given a story, and if you don't honor it, if you don't write it, it can find someone else to express itself. So I'm not putting myself in that category, but I do think it's kind of interesting that this initial story arrived for me, and then I don't think I was brave enough. And then I tried other versions, other things, other stories, and I never could quite complete. And then when I went back to write this story, it came out very, very quickly. So I had a complete manuscript, only to say second draft, after 9 months. So it's kind of interesting, that idea that potentially and I know it does sound really mystical, but you're given a story, and if you don't write it, it kind of clogs the pathways. And since I've written that book, I mean, I've written book 2, but book 3, 4, and 5 are very clear. But none of the intermediary books, they don't get a look in. They just feel like filler.
And how did you get this one published? How did you go? Can you tell about
Well, actually, from what I understand, talking to other friends that are writers, with a lot of ease, which I don't take for granted. So I have a company called Pilot Light where I run workshops, and I was in a workshop with someone who is a bookish person in a publishing house, and she said to me, "You sound like a writer." And I went, well, and then somebody that I was working with said, "She's just finished her first manuscript." And that person said, "I'd love to read it." And actually nobody had read it at that point. Okay. Nobody at all. And so I kind of the next day I just thought, well, here's an opportunity. Let's just release it, put it out there. And so it was through that where she said, "I think you need an agent. Let me introduce you to some people, but a particular person who I think will be a fit for you." I met that agent. Their name's Jean Rippon, and it was just an instantaneous fit in that kind of way that doesn't happen as much as we think it's going to when we're kids. I just thought she was wonderful. And then it was a matter of months before Ultimo Press offered me a deal, and James Kello, who runs it, I just felt that he understood the book, and I felt a great simpatico with him, and they offered me a 2-book deal, and then we were off and to the races.
No, that's a great story behind your publishing journey. Could you tell me as well, growing up in that, had you always thought you would write?
No, I hadn't. I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I grew up in a loving but savage household. So I grew up in a household with a lot of books, and there was a lot of conversation around what great literature was and great books were, and I never put myself into that space. So I was always writing. And then I think it was turning 40 where I was just, well, if I don't do it, if I don't just commit to it, there's always going to be this terrible lack of bravery in my life. So it was actually turning 40 after having my 4th baby and going, well, what is there to lose? Let's just commit to this. And so do I feel I've always been a writer? On some level, I feel like that's sort of an arrogance to say. I still feel peculiar telling people that I'm an author and I'm published. But I've always loved to write. And this feels natural and beautiful and lovely, and I feel full of gratitude.
And could you share with us what sort of research you needed to do for Where the Light Gets On?
That's such a great question. So it's based in 3 different countries, or more specifically 3 different cities. So Tasmania, London, and Florence. And I mean, it sort of feels like another world. It was very much pre-COVID. Well, I've lived in those cities, and I very specifically. So when I was tracking Delphi Hoffman, who's the lead character, as I mentioned, when I was looking at her setting out towards wisdom and self-understanding, I wanted to track her through different countries because they have different colors and textures and feels. So I wanted it to be of sorts a kind of road trip, but a road trip to self. So research, I wasn't sitting in libraries, although I do love to do that. I wasn't Googling things much. I was looking at places that I had been and experienced, and then looking at them through the lens of the character or the characters and how I could press the story forwards. So I used to be in another life an actor. So I very much approached this through the lens of characterization and character first, and storytelling. And I wanted it to be a ripping yarn, to use that old, because I wanted to move the reader through. So those are the books that I really love, where you open up, and I don't know if I've been successful in this, but I gave it a solid whirl, where you open up and then you're drawn right through to the end. I didn't want it to be labored and self-indulgent, self-reverential.
And we've got a few people watching, so just wanted to remind the people watching, if you've got any questions for Zoe, please type them in comments and you'll have a chance to win a copy of Where the Light Gets In, thanks to Ultimo Press. I've got a question from Kelly. She wonders what has been your favourite and also what has been your worst part of your writing journey so far.
Oh, Kelly, what an amazing question. What an amazing question. I want to honor that with truth. Let me think. Okay, so it's an unexpected answer. I would have thought that the most amazing moment was when I knew I had an agent or I knew I had a publisher. And actually, it was much quieter than that. It was just doing the work on my own. So it's interesting, isn't it, where you expect it to be one thing and then it's another. Those have been amazing. But actually just living with those characters and fostering them and being alive in my imagination, that was the greatest gift. And I'm not meaning to sound churlish or ungrateful for the other stuff. That's been incredible. So that's that. And then the worst part has also been unexpected. The vulnerability and exposure of putting it out there.
Yeah.
That sense of doing something in a very private space and you send it out and hoping it connects with readers, because I did write it as a communication, as a exploration of questions. And so far the response has been lovely and the reviews have generally been lovely. But you know, there was one person who I've never met. I get lovely emails every day, but there was one person who wrote to me and said, I hated your book, and what is wrong with you for writing a book like this? And where I come to that, and I sort of, I thought, should I engage and write a letter and say, well, it's a novel, you can put it down, you can close it. Nobody forced you.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, look, if I get too attached to that, there's going to be too excoriating. So that's the one part, letting it go. But another part, which is just totally weird, is people in my life thinking that they were in the novel.
Yeah.
So particularly my sisterhood, which is super lovely, but my dear sisterhood sort of saying, I loved being in the book, and just I found that very odd. And particularly if we discuss the nature of my next book, that makes me super nervous, because I love my sisterhood, but they're actually not in this book. They are, because I talk a lot about friendship. I talk a lot about women coming together. So I've learned that from them, but no particular person in my life. So even my husband did say, so there's this glorious man in the book called Orlo. And even my husband, after the book was published, said, am I Orlo? And it was just, no, no, darling, actually, not, but I do love you very much.
No, that's funny that everyone finding parts of them in your characters. That is,
yeah.
And Belinda wonders if you had a favourite character to write.
That's a good question too, Belinda. Yes, I did. So in the book, there's actually quite a lot of characters. But there is a character called Art, who he arrives like a guardian angel of sorts for Delphi. And he is inclusive and warm and non-judgmental and eccentric. And someone said to me fairly recently, which horrified me, but I also thought that's really interesting, that every debut novel is part memoir, part wish fulfillment. So that kind of shocked me. And I guess in part, I wish that I was Art, and I wish that I had an Art in my life.
And what do you hope readers will love about your book?
Well, what I hope is, I feel super grateful that anyone will read it, but what I hope they will find in there are a lot of questions, and that they feel are worthy and interesting. But that the book, I'm really interested in hope I'm really interested in connection. So I'm really interested in books that nourish us and expand us. I mean, God, we need that more than ever right at the moment. So I hope that they feel, wow, and maybe this is Icarus. I hope they feel challenged and included in a conversation and warmed. That would be my great hope.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And Kelly wonders if you're currently working on your second book.
I am. It is back with Ultimo Press. So I was very lucky to get a 2-book deal, and book 2 is a very different kettle of fish. So I've got the working title of The Dangers of Female Provocation. I don't know, but it's much more around femaleness, gender, sex. So I think about it as a sex-soaked morality tale, and the lead in that is a woman named Odessa, who is, for all extensive purposes, highly successful in the way that we traditionally perceive that, and she looks around at her sisterhood, who she absolutely adores, and perceives that the men, their husbands, are not stepping up. So she takes it on board as her responsibility to teach them to be better husbands and better men. And in that process, there's a decoupling from morality, and she goes to some very extreme behaviors to do that. So I had so much fun writing it. I mean, if the first book is about grief and trauma and how we recover and come home to self and love, the second book is about love and power and sex and friendship. And surprise, surprise, the second one was a lot more fun to write.
Yeah, I bet. And whereabouts is that set?
That's a great question too. So interestingly, so I live in Sydney. I live in Sydney, Australia, and I absolutely love living here. And book 3 is set very much here, but book 2 is set in London.
Okay.
And I think part of that is because I love London, and I lived there for many years. But when I left, I felt so claustrophobic. I felt so hemmed in as a mama of 3 young cubs, and it felt like things were starting to spin out of control. I was interested in that idea of extreme privilege and being in the center of a pressure cooker, and what that adds to our psyche and our friendships and the way we turn up in the world. So what I was interested in was, how can because I didn't want to tell another story about another mad woman behaving badly. I have no interest in that trope. That bores the hell out of me. What I was interested in is what happens to a woman who is highly intelligent and successful, where various traumas happen, and she acts out of what she thinks is a moral imperative, but she may get that wrong. So I'm interested in that idea of good people doing bad things, and I'm interested in bad people that do good things. I love that ambiguity. So this one, I very much hope that men read it, because it is steeped in female rage. 2 of the books that really influenced me writing the book were Rebecca Traster's book Good and Mad, which I highly recommend to anyone, which is an incredible distillation of the Me Too campaign. And then David Lazer's book Women, Men, and the Whole Damn Thing. So this conversation of maleness and femaleness, but not just through the heteronormative lens. I was interested in exploring that, because it took me to arrive to about 40 where I could actually own my anger, because until that point, I'd been told it was mad, unattractive, unacceptable. And then I realized, actually, that's just internalized misogyny. You know, I face, and also this is a place of privilege. I have white skin, I'm educated, I'm speaking to you from Sydney, so I'm aware of the context. But the misogyny that I deal with day to day, that we as women deal with day to day, I wanted to explore that, but with men coming to the table. So it's not just a bloodbath of Odessa going out there and creating carnage and creating victory. That's why it's a morality tale.
No, that sounds really interesting and a lot different, I think, from your first novel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What genre would you put it on?
Look, I don't know, and I had a so maybe it's psychological thriller.
Mm,
But I don't know because I mean I had a friend once who said to me, if you can't define the genre of your book, it'll never succeed because you can't pitch it. And then I figure in part that's not my job as the writer.
no, that's
That's
right.
lovely Ultimo Press
Yeah,
to
exactly.
sort that out.
Mm,
So I wrote about what interests me, what I thought was interesting to
mm,
explore, what I thought would be gripping to read.
mm.
And other than that, I stood out of my own way. And then it's over to Ultimo
Yeah,
Press.
and they'll be the ones to put it in the
That's their
genre and
job.
promote, yeah, and
Yeah,
promote your book in the.
their expertise
Mm,
is selling books. I know
mm,
nothing about that.
mm,
I'm in the space of the writing them, so I write them and I let them. So I tell you what, I'll ask them what
yeah,
genre they think, and I'll
yeah,
get back to you.
yeah. Sounds good. And where the light gets in has some quite emotional scenes. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, when you're writing an emotionally draining scene, is there something you
Mm.
need to do to get into the mood for it?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Um, I'm a very emotional person,
Mm,
uh, probably problematically so. So it's not the getting into it. In my job, in part of what I teach is empathy. I'm
mm,
very interested in other people's feelings and thoughts and perspectives. So it wasn't so much the getting into, it was the getting out of.
yeah.
And it was coming back to needing to be a mama and a wife
Mm,
and a friend. So I've never had, as yet, stretches of time. There are snatched times. So if I am writing something that is what we would generally classify as very dark, and then I have a small person coming into the room and asking for a Vegemite sandwich and a
yeah.
glass of milk,
Yeah.
that's a peculiar rent out that
Mm,
way. So it was more the latter of coming
mm,
out and just being present back in my life. And then clawing my way back to that space of being in the space of being able to
mm.
write it.
Mm. And seeing as you mentioned that as well, like your children and getting in the right mindset to be able to do your writing, you sound like you're a very busy person. You've got 4 children and another job as well. How
Yeah.
did you find time? Did you have to set time aside, or what did you do to make sure you had time to write?
Well, it's a really hard one, isn't it? I said to my husband, I want to write a book,
Mm,
and um, and he said, I'll do whatever I can to support you. But at that time, he was running a business largely out of China, so he was gone. So I wish that there was a lovely answer to this. It was by hook and by crook. It was 20 minutes here,
mm,
half an hour there. It was
mm,
less sleep. It was no lovely telly.
mm,
It was no lovely reading. And you're a big reader. I'm a big reader.
mm,
I had to choose what I did with my time. So
mm.
instead of having a glass of wine with dinner, which is one of life's great luxuries, I just had to stop that
Yeah.
because I'd tuck the babies into bed and then I'd go to work. And then I'd get up before work in the morning. And then I would allow it to foster throughout the day.
Mm,
So, but it was this absolute conviction that I needed to press on and see it done.
mm,
So I did I felt in a rush, which sounds bad, but actually there was a great conviction to it. So there wasn't a huge amount of going out. There wasn't a huge amount of it. So instead of input, I
mm,
changed the channel. All of my spare time was output.
mm,
That said, there were a couple of great moments. So say with book 2, I was facilitating down in Hobart, and I needed to go into quarantine. That's been a horrendous experience for most people that I've spoken to. For me, it was one of the greatest gifts. I had 2 weeks alone in a room,
mm,
and I wrote 40,000 words, which actually almost 30,000 of those have stayed intact.
yeah.
And the revelation for me around that was deep thought,
Mm,
when you can actually just clear the decks.
mm,
So when I hear about writers that have an office where they go from 9 to 5. That just sounds so luxurious. That must be amazing. A writer friend of mine talked about the fact that you need to go away so that your life can recede and the life of the novel can swell. And my experience of being in Tassie in quarantine was that there's a real truth to that. That's an amazing luxury. But that wasn't available to me with book one, more so with book two, because I'm also getting the feel for how this works. Full stop. Yes.
And when you do have time to read, what do you like reading? And maybe if there's something you might have read lately you'd like to recommend to us?
So I read very widely. I don't have a specific genre that I read. There are some genres where I thought I'm not so into that, but actually there are books that sit at outliers for that. So when I'm ever asked, what are your favorite top 5, I always feel a bit panicked because there are just so many books that I love. But what I can talk about is what I've recently read that I really love. So I'm always reading. Except for those brief periods where I'm writing, where I need to stop. I feel very lonely without reading. Reading has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. But in the last few months, what I've read, so the last 6 months, are we in May? We're in May, right?
No.
Are we in May?
No, yeah. 1st of June today.
Oh, June, okay. So in the last 6 months, the books that have really stood out for me, Jonathan Franzen's The Crossroads. Do you like Jonathan Franzen? Have you read his work?
I haven't read any of his books.
Yeah, so I read that book and I just sort of walked, I literally walked around with it for a few hours afterwards because I didn't want to put it down.
Oh, really?
And then I read a book by Graham Swift, who is a writer that I hadn't read, The Mothering Sunday, a small little novella. And in the beginning I was like, what is this? And it has lasted with me. I think about it. It's like it's performed a magic spell on me. So, and then since then I've read 2 other Graham Swifts and gifted that book to everyone that I can think of. So those are 2 of late that have been huge for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing them. We always love adding more books to our list of ones to read.
I know there are so many out there, aren't there?
Exactly.
It's a bit scary. Not long enough life.
Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. Just wondering before you go, do you want to let people know how they can keep in touch with you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm on Instagram. I have an Instagram which is Zoe Hearts Books, and Hearts is HEARTS, so Hearts. So Zoe.Hearts Books, or you can find me on LinkedIn, which is Zoe Coyle. And then I have a writer's site, which is www.zoecoyle.com. So be in touch with me. Talk to me about the books you're reading, because and actually that's been amazing for me in the book nerdy area of Instagram. I've loved that, having book reading buddies all over the world. So please. I've loved it. I've been exposed to so many books and writers that wouldn't have come my way, and I love book nerds. So come connect with me and we can book nerd together.
Well, thank you. And before you go, I also just want to share your cover again, because it is an amazing cover. I love the woman on the front. It's a great picture, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It was really beautiful.
Yeah.
I really love it too.
You must have been really happy when you first saw it.
I really was. And it reminds me a little bit of The Mayflies. I don't know if you read that book, but that was a group of young men together. But this idea of, I love it. I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it is great. Well, thanks so much. And thanks for the people who joined in and asked some questions.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone that joined. It's super lovely to meet you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.